So who are the new atheists? So the whole movement known as New Atheism started with these 4 people, okay? Now, I'm sure that some of you may not know them, some of you may know at least one of those figures out there, but these are the 4 main guys that are called the New Atheists. In 2004, the individual on the top left corner, yes sir, so the individual on the top left corner, his name is Sam Harris. He came up with a book called The End of Faith. Within this book, he criticizes the main 3 religions. These include Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Okay? After 2004 and 2006, we had 2 books. One is by Daniel Dennett on the right top corner. He is a specialist in philosophy of mind, things to do with what makes up our mental activities. And he wrote a book called Breaking the Spell. Fundamentally, the thesis of the book is that evolution pretty much breaks down anything that religion can give us, and we don't need religion to explain anything that we need to do in reality. The most famous of all the atheists in the contemporary period is none other than Richard Dawkins. In 2006, he published a book called The God Delusion. This is not his first book. He's printed several books before this. He is an Oxford University professor, and he's done a lot of work in evolution. And pretty much his main thesis is, 1, there's not enough proof for God's existence. 2, science debunks religion. That's his thesis. This book has become so famous that it's been translated in various languages, Urdu being one of them, and it is widely available online. So even if the Pakistani community may not have access to this or whatever, it's available in Urdu language. So there is a concerted effort to make these works as accessible as possible. Just a few years ago, this book was also translated to Farsi, so they can even propagate into the Iranian territories. So there is a very orchestrated effort going on here to make these works accessible to the languages of the people. Finally, in 2007, we had a book called God is Not Great. This is written by Christopher Hitchens in 2007. He has passed away. He passed away in 2011. And in this book, so the title of the book is interesting. So when we do the adhan, we say Allahu Akbar, right? Which roughly translates to that God is great or God is the greatest. So this is a play of that title, that God is not the greatest. So it's a very provocative book. And he does a very similar tactic. He tries to argue that religion is useless, science is about religion, Islam is a very barbaric culture, and we need to kind of eliminate it. So in effect, these guys are called the New Atheists, okay? Now, in addition to these New Atheists, we have other atheists that are coming to prominence. Of these include these 4 individuals. This is not an exhaustive list, there are many more, but I've just chosen the most prominent ones that I found from my research. The first one on the left, his name is Lawrence Krauss. He wrote a book called A Universe from Nothing. So he believes the universe can be explained if you assume a quantum field, which the total energy equals to 0, therefore the universe comes from nothing. Michael Shermer is the editor of a Skeptic magazine, and he does a lot of work on the nature of the brain and our nature of our beliefs. Victor Stenger is a physicist. He has passed away. A.C. Grayling is a well-known philosopher, and all of these guys have written several books against religion. So this is known as the second wave of atheism. So while these guys started the movement, it does not mean it has ended. It has many other successors that are opening the field and widening the debate. And bear in mind, all of these come from slightly different specializations. Some are philosophers, some are physicists, some are biologists. And they will criticize religion from all 3 angles. So when a Muslim is confronted with these questions, you need to be well versed in a lot of different territories that you may not have specialization in. This makes the conversation much more difficult to have. So that on one Muslim, he has to now access literature on physics, literature on evolution or biology, and literature in philosophy and theology, which is a little bit too much to do. And that's why Muslims, particularly Muslims who are not well versed, they don't have a good background in any one of these subjects, it is easy to convert them out of Islam. So that is the main problem that we have here. It's a very interdisciplinary discussion. Okay, so now let me try and explain to you the link between New Atheism and Islam. So I'm about to present to you 4 quotations by non-Muslims to avoid any bias from my side. These are 4 non-Muslims who have observed a link between New Atheism and Islam. This is Ian Markham. He's done a lot of work on the relationship between Christianity and Islam. He's actually written a book on a Turkish scholar called Bediüzzaman Said Nursi. And he's a very famous scholar from Turkey. Regardless, this is his comment in one of his books. Sam Harris is the worst. He makes Islamophobia a central part of his message. Okay? I'm not going to read the white stuff, I'm just trying to highlight the main things. Then he says, it is interesting to note how both Harris and Hitchens support the American war to Iraq primarily as a result of their deep prejudice against Islam. So you see, Islamophobia is a very central point in their narrative. This is Tina Beatty. She's a feminist author. She does a lot of work on feminism. She wrote a book called The New Atheist. It's a very short book. And even she realized that there's an interesting observation here. So I'll read the whole paragraph from the beginning because it's very important. Today the New Atheists are as hostile towards theologians. By theologians I mean ulama, shuyukh, muftis, imams, right? As the most militant Victorian scientists were back in the day. But the battle lines are drawn between 2 protagonists, the Christian men of God and the Western men of science. So you know there's this whole narrative in the atheist mindset that science and religion are at war, and the central reference for this is Galileo. So Galileo presented a finding that contradicted the church, and since then this episode has been used by atheists to say, look, Galileo was a man of science, the church went against him, and basically put him into house arrest. So this is a very famous episode. This is what she's referring to. In the 19th century, the religious other was made of all those barbarians and savages who littered the imperial globe with their presence. Now listen, this is the interesting part. Today, it is Islam which constitutes the religious other, and it is still represented as a barbaric force to be conquered and civilized by the imperial powers of reason and progress. So there's a very famous narrative called The Clash of Civilizations, right? Samuel Huntington wrote this book. And in this book, he says that ultimately, you have a war between West and Islam. This is the war. And it's a clash of, literally, civilizations, which are based on their fundamental worldviews between the 2 realities. And what she's trying to say is that atheists either consciously or subconsciously adopt this worldview to create a conflict narrative with Islam. They believe Islam is barbaric, rationally outdated, and will take us to the Stone Ages, which is why it needs to be intellectually conquered with the powers of reason and the powers of science. This is Rabbi William Emerson. And he's done a very short article on New Atheism. So the article is pretty much trying to ask the question, what makes New Atheism new? This is the question he's trying to ask. Because atheism is not a recent phenomenon. We have had atheism even before 200, 300, 400 years back, right? It's not a new thing, it's not a new position. But what makes today's atheism different? Now he has a very interesting point. He says, and I'm just reading the yellow part there, more than anything else, in my view, their attack on Islam is what puts new into New Atheism. Islam in the New Atheist writing is consistently depicted as irrational, immoral, and in its purest form, violent. So you see, this is again, these are non-Muslims who are making these observations. I haven't quoted a single Muslim author. Finally, this author, his name is Stephen LeDrew. He wrote a book called The Politics of Atheism. It's a fascinating book. Shows you how the movement works on the political and social level and what are its goals in terms of gaining prominence over culture and society in general. And this is a very interesting observation that he makes. For New Atheism, Islam represents a pre-modern and a postmodern type of threat. As a religion founded on faith, it is pre-modern threat to scientific modernity. And it illustrates the progressive evolution of human societies, with Islamic society representing barbarism and the West representing civilization. So you see, he believes that atheists do view Islam as this, West versus East mentality, or old versus new mentality, science versus anti-science mentality. And now, it also represents the postmodern threat in that new atheists believe that epistemic relativism and cultural pluralism have paradoxically rendered the West incapable of effectively dealing with the threat posed by radical Islam. Islam, indeed, is the most important element in the new atheist construction of an ideal of Western civilization. So you see, 4 observations by 4 different non-Muslim thinkers who have come to the same kind of observation that 1, Islam is very important in the new atheist narrative. 2, it rests on a few caricatures, a few principles, which include that Islam is outdated, has no scientific backing, and is pretty much a barbaric civilization we need to bomb out of existence. And that these are not quotes from new atheists. We're going to look at them in a second. So what I want to make apparently clear, at least from these 4 quotations, and there are many more, these are just a few that I've picked out, that it does seem to be the case that Islam plays an important role in the new atheist narrative and construction.